And now a little story from the Appleseed.
I'm sorry you have to see me like this. I'm just wearing this old black nasty coat. I wanted to wear my fine fringed leather jacket. I paid a pretty penny for it. I paid more than one pretty penny for it. But the weather people were predicting, I was going to say weatherman, but that's not appropriate anymore. And weather persons just sound so uppity. The weather people were predicting precipitation, and I couldn't risk it with my fine fringed leather jacket, so I just wore this old black coat. But I tell you what, since you all were so kind to come to this taping, if you will send me a letter, I will autograph a postcard of myself in that leather jacket and send it to you. You look at me askance. You don't keep a stack of postcards to autograph and send to people when they write you a letter? If you want to be famous, you got to start acting like it. So right after this, we'll set you up with a photo shoot. I want to tell you how I got that fine leather jacket. I had a gig in Salt Lake City, Utah, and then 3 days later, I had a gig in Omaha, Nebraska. And it didn't make sense to fly on an airplane from South Carolina to Salt Lake, do a show, fly home to South Carolina just to repack and fly back halfway across the country to Omaha, Nebraska. So I thought, I know, I'll rent a car and I'll have this opportunity to see the great American West. I will drive 20 hours from Salt Lake City, Utah to Omaha, Nebraska. So on the day that I left Salt Lake City, I went to the car rental place and I had just reserved a medium-sized car, but I didn't know what they might have for me. And I was really hoping for a Ford Bronco. I mean, that's what you need when you go across the great American West. Or even better, a convertible Mustang. That would be the car to have. I got a Kia. It looked like a wind-up toy. So I started out across the great American West in my Kia, and eventually I got out of Salt Lake and passed all of the bedroom communities of Salt Lake, and I was in the high desert. I have never seen landscape like that in all my life. Y'all, when God made the world, he made South Carolina first. And he had one of those big 64 Crayola crayon boxes. And he opened it up and he colored some azaleas fuchsia, and he colored some purple, and he colored some camellias in a dusty pink, and he colored the wisteria in a beautiful Chinese blue, and he made the sky with beautiful sunsets. And after he'd used up all those colors, he came to the high desert of Utah and said, well, I've got this brown. I have never in my life seen such a landscape. The only variation of color was a tumbleweed went rolling across the road in front of me, and I lie not, a coyote went right behind it, and there was nobody to tell me I couldn't. I rolled down my window and yelled out, the roadrunner went that way. But other than that, that's all that I saw until I came to a town called Vernal, Utah. And by the time I got to Vernal, it was lunchtime, and I thought, ooh, I want to eat like the cowboys ate. And there was a diner there. You could tell it was a historic building, and I thought, that's the perfect place. So I went in, and sure enough, there were all these men in boots and jeans and hats, and they're all sitting on high stools at a lunch counter. And I went right in and bellied my way between two fellas and got up on a stool. Little girl came over and she said, what would you like to have? And I said, well, cowboys eat chili, right? I'd like to try a good Western chili. Do you have chili? She said, of course we have chili. You want some chili? I said, yes, I want chili. She reached under the counter, pulled out a can of Hormel, cracked it open with a can opener, poured it into a plastic bowl, stuck it in the microwave, and nuked it for 2.5 minutes and handed it to me. And she said, that'll be $2.95. So I sat there and ate chili from a can that had been heated up in the microwave. And I got back in my car and I drove to the visitor center in Vernal, Utah, and I said, what do you have to see around here? And they said, lots of dead stuff. I said, oh, that's like South Carolina. We love dead stuff. We have dead people in South Carolina. Yeah, lots of them. Yeah. We feel a great kinship with the people of Asia, particularly the Chinese, because of all of our dead people. We eat a lot of rice and worship our ancestors. Yes, that's what we do. And I said, historic homes, graveyards? They said, no, dead dinosaurs. I said, oh, you've got some really dead stuff. I learned that you could drive down the highway and you could turn off onto these trails. And that's what it was. I mean, it was just a trail. I really wished I'd had the Ford Bronco. And you'd drive to the end of this long trail and you'd come up to a cliff where were all these old bones embedded in the side of the cliff. And there were archaeologists there and they'd give you sifters and a pickaxe and a shovel and you could help dig and sift and find stuff. And they invited me to help. And I said, I'm from South Carolina. I'm not accustomed to getting dirty. So I just took pictures and got back in the car and kept on going. I left Vernal, and after a while, everything started to green up a good bit because I was approaching Denver, Colorado. I was still a good ways from Denver, but everything started to green up, and of course, the land started to rise. The mountains are getting steeper and higher, and I came into this town called Steamboat Springs. And by the time I got to Steamboat Springs, it was supper time, and Steamboat Springs is a real cow town. I mean, they used to have cattle drives right down the main street of Steamboat Springs. Now they do that just once a year with longhorn steer, and they're all very well trained. You know, they never poop in the street or anything like that. And so I thought, oh, this would be the place to get a steak. That's some real cowboy food. And so I found a restaurant that advertised a whole fine array of steaks. I ordered a steak, baked potato, and a salad. And when they brought it to me, the steak was red. I don't mean like rare red, I mean like raw red. And I said, what is this? And he said, it's a steak. And I said, cook it. He said, oh, this is cook your own. The grill is over there in the corner. And I said, I am from South Carolina. We are accustomed to being served when we go to a restaurant. He said, well, then let me help you to the grill. So he took me over the grill, showed me how to make a nice rare steak. I sat down, ate my steak, and then I got back in the car, and I drove for a little while, checked into a little hotel. It was dark by the time I checked in, so I really couldn't see anything. And then the next morning, I had scheduled an entire day just to take my time and drive up over the mountains in Rocky Mountain National Park. Y'all, oh my goodness, 14,000 feet up, snow even in the middle of the summertime, and absolutely breathtakingly beautiful. I was at the highest visitor center in North America, right there in the top of the park, and they had these great big picture windows that were completely covered in a snowbank. So you couldn't see a thing. It just looked like big white movie screens because of all the snow piled up against the building. And the park ranger, he said, sometimes we have a lot of snow and it takes it all summer to melt off. And he said, if you want some good camera views, just go out and do what all the other tourists are doing. Just climb up on top of the snow and you'll be standing on top of this building, actually, and you can see a very panoramic view and take photographs. So I went up there and I realized that when you're on the top of that snowbank, so now it's about 14,030 feet in the air. If you stood on your left leg with your right leg pointed back toward the west and your left elbow pointed toward the east, and you rotated slightly at a 90-degree angle, you could get cell phone reception. So I called my wife, who was back home, and when she answered, I said, guess where I'm at? And she said, I have no idea. And I said, I'm 14,000 feet up in Rocky Mountain National Park. And she said, oh, great. What are you seeing? I said, oh, it's very pretty. I didn't want to carry on because she really wanted to come with me on that trip, and she wasn't able to, and I didn't want to make her feel bad. She said, oh, I know you. What are you seeing? I said, it's the most beautiful thing I've ever seen in my life. I've been crying for 45 minutes. It's absolutely fabulous. She said, have a good time. I hung up, got back in the car, and I went down and down and down and down the mountains until I came to Estes Park, Colorado. Lovely little mountain town. They were preparing for elk rut season. Y'all, that is something you have to brace yourself for. This is a family show, so I'll just leave it to your imagination. But I have never seen animals conduct themselves like that in South Carolina. And then I drove on over toward Denver. I spent the night in Denver, and the next day, I learned when I was at the hotel in Denver that nearby in Golden, Colorado, up on Lookout Mountain, I could visit the grave of Buffalo Bill Cody. And I thought, oh, I would love to see that. So I went over to Golden, and I drove up Lookout Mountain right at sunset time. And everybody goes up there to see the sunset. Buffalo Bill wanted to be buried on the top of Lookout Mountain because from there, You can look back toward the west and see the Rocky Mountains, or you can look directly east and you can see the Great Prairie. And he had had a life of adventure in both of those places, and he wanted to be buried between the two. So the gift shop was open. The museum was closed for the evening, but the gift shop was open. And before I went into the gift shop, I went up to pay my respects to Buffalo Bill, and there's a very nice grave site there. And then right next to it is a place for his wife, but I don't think she's in there. I met her in the gift shop. I'm convinced of it. She runs the place. That gift shop was everything that Buffalo Bill ever was in his life, from tacky t-shirts and bumper stickers to high-end leather jackets with fringe and turquoise beading. It was fabulous. And the lady running the place had long gray iron hair that came way down to her waist. She had big, beautiful Indian jewelry on every knuckle of her bony hands. When I walked in, she said, "Hey, honey, welcome to Colorado. How can I help you?" And I said, "Oh, well, I'm just here kind of looking around and thought I'd take in the sight of Buffalo Bill's grave and just looking around in the gift shop. I noticed those fabulous leather jackets you have." She said, "Yeah, honey, I got one that'll fit you perfectly. You want to try them on?" They were behind closed glass because they were very, very expensive. And I said, "Oh, I don't think I could afford one of those. They're lovely to look at." She said, "No, honey, you could try them on." I said, "Really? Really?" And she unlocked the cabinet and she slid the glass open. She said, "Just help yourself. I got to go outside and take a smoke." I didn't know she smoked. So she went outside to take a smoke break, and I tried on all of those jackets. They had one of those triple mirrors, so I could see myself 6 times over and from every side. Oh, it was fabulous. And then when she came back in, she said, "That one looks real good on you. You should buy it." I said, "I really can't justify the expense of this jacket. My wife didn't get to come on the trip. If I came home looking better than she does, then there would really be problems." So I thanked her, and we hung it back up, and I went on my way. The next day, I left Denver, and I traveled across southern Nebraska to see absolutely nothing. Never in my life or the life of my wife have I seen so many miles of absolutely nothing. I mean, there was not a tree, there was not a bush, there was not even a cow. I think they put all the cattle away for my benefit so I'd have the full experience. I mean, 8 hours of nothing. I finally did see the state tree of Nebraska. It's a telephone pole. But other than that, absolutely nothing. And I started to panic because there wasn't even any place to eat. Back east where I'm from, you're driving along on the interstate highway, there's a big blue sign, and it'll say gasoline, and then it'll list under that, different gasoline stations, Shell, Sunoco, and you can pull off and find some place to gas up. There'll be a sign that says food, and it'll list places where you can eat. Finally, I saw a sign that said food. And so I took that exit in pure desperation. And when I got to the top of the ramp, there was another sign that said McDonald's, 47 miles that way, Burger King, 32 miles that way. I wish I'd bought that fringe jacket so I could chew on the fringe. I drove and drove and drove, and finally I came into Hastings, Nebraska. Now that was the one place that I had Googled ahead of time for my trip because I wanted to visit Hastings, Nebraska. They are the birthplace of Kool-Aid. And I live in Summerville, South Carolina. We are the birthplace of sweet tea. And so I thought, we have a kinship. I should go and see this. Yes, we were on opposite sides of the war, but now we are reunited to rot the teeth of children everywhere. So I pulled off the main road and I drove 10 or 12 miles down through some cornfields into Hastings, Nebraska. I had taken a big basket full of sweet tea products from our museum in Summerville to the museum that was about the birthplace of Kool-Aid in Hastings. And I went in and I was wearing my seersucker suit so that I would look very official. And I went in and I handed that basket to the girl at the reception counter and told her that I was from the birthplace of sweet tea and our mayor had sent his compliments and I was serving as an ambassador from the Sweet Tea Trail with this gift basket to the birthplace of Kool-Aid. And she said, "Would you like to see our museum?" And I said, "Oh, yes, I would." And she said, "That'll be $5. And I said, "I'm from South Carolina." And she said, "That'll still be $5. So I paid $5 and I saw the museum. It was wonderful. Kool-Aid got its start as a product called Fruit Smack. And it came in little glass vials, but they broke when they would try to send them through the mail. So then they learned about the dehydration process, and they started making powdered Kool-Aid. There was a display of the great big red Kool-Aid man. Do you remember him back in like the 1970s and 80s on the TV commercials? He'd bust through all those blocks of ice and yell out, "Oh yeah!" I got my picture made with the Kool-Aid man. It was great. And then I asked the people at the museum, I said, okay, I'd like to eat some food before I travel on to Omaha, and I'd like to try something local, something with local flavor. And they said, you should have a runza. And I said, what's that? And they said, well, it came over from Eastern Europe with early pioneers to this area. And it's a steamed bun stuffed with spiced cabbage and ground beef. And I said, I would eat that if they cook it for you. They said, yeah, they cook it for you. I said, okay, so point me to a runza. So I went to a restaurant called Runza, because they serve runza and fries, of course. So I sat down with my runza and fries. Being alone, I struck up a conversation with a couple ladies who were sitting in a booth next to me. They were both farmers' wives. It was a mother and an adult daughter. And I was telling them about my trip across the great American West, and I told them about 8 hours across the prairie of absolutely nothing. And they said, you're genuinely excited about this, aren't you? And I said, yes, I've only read about it in books, but I've never seen it for myself. And they said, we avoid that drive at all costs because it's so boring, it'll make you suicidal. I said, well, I did see one thing that was particularly interesting. Just as I turned off the main highway to come into Hastings, there at the crossroad, there was a feed lot. Y'all, the smell would knock you back. I mean, hundreds and hundreds of cows just eating and doing what they do after they eat. They pushed the manure around with bulldozers. I mean, there were mountains of it. They should have had a visitor center at the top of one of them. It was ridiculous. And I said, what do you do with that? And she said, there's a lot of money right there. That's the smell of money if you're from Nebraska. I said, really? How does that work? One of those farmers' wives, she said, a lot of that is plowed back into the soil, and we grow a lot of corn from that. She said some of it is processed into methane gas and bottled and used as a fuel for power sources and such. She said, and then a lot of it is diluted and put into big yellow bags called black cow fertilizer. I said, I know that. I put that on my tomatoes back in South Carolina. You can buy it at the hardware store. She said, sure, that comes from Nebraska. She said, there's plenty of money in manure. Of course, you being a professional storyteller, you would know that. With my hand up, that is exactly what she said to me. I said, I have found my people right here in Nebraska. So I did my work in Omaha, and then I turned in my rental car and flew home. And the minute I got home, I said to my wife, can I please have one of those fringed leather jackets from the Buffalo Bill Museum? And she said, I tell you what, if you can get 3 clients to call you and ask for stories on a Western theme, I'll let you buy that jacket. So a day or two later, a school principal called me, and he said, do you have any stories about Lewis and Clark? And I said, they wore fringe. I've seen it in the encyclopedia. That's one. And then another school called, and they said, we'd like some stories about pioneers. I said, ooh, that's 2. And then a third school called, and I took matters into my own hands. And when I answered the phone, I said, this is storyteller Tim Lowry, specializing in stories of the great American West. Lewis and Clark, pioneers, and Buffalo Bill. And they said, we don't really care what you tell as long as they're good stories. And I said, perfect, it's going to be stories of the great American West. And then I hung up from that call, and I called the Buffalo Bill Museum, and a very familiar voice answered the phone. Hello. I said, I don't know if you remember me. When I was in your museum, I was dressed in a seersucker suit. She said, oh yeah, honey, I already boxed that up and got your name on it. Shipped it to South Carolina, and now I'm the proud owner of a very fine fringed leather jacket.
Thanks for joining us for a little story from the Appleseed.